This past year has seen quite a few writings come out about the former longtime director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. An interesting thing about Hoover is that the beginning of his life, before he went on the path to law school and everything that led him to lead the FBI, he'd actually thought about going into ministry. And this sense of ministry in his life continued throughout his whole time, throughout his time leading the FBI. Hoover was a frequent contributor to the magazine Christianity Today. And his articles there were primarily meant to help with his anti-communist work. He also cultivated many relationships with clergy throughout many different denominations, inviting them to come in and lead prayer and retreats for the so-called G-men of the FBI, the government men who made up the agents of that organization. Now, Hoover expected his G-men to live up to a certain image. And this was an image that he felt was lockstep with what it meant to be both an American and a Christian, feeling that the values of Americans and Christians would be the very thing needed to combat the communist wave, the Red Scare, as Hoover saw it impacting our nation. And this idea that Hoover had was of a muscular Christian. It's the image that we sometimes see in our churches throughout the world. This idea of Jesus being on the cross, not frail and weak as he would have been, but with finely toned abs, a strong, muscular Christian. A Christianity that meant strength, meant victory, meant winning no matter what. Now, Hoover felt that the government was necessary to help instigate these ideas of faith. He felt that it was necessary for the government to be the forefront in leading this idea he had of Christianity, of this strong Christian and American image. And he didn't like it when the clergy that he worked with disagreed with him in any way. Instead of taking a step back and thinking, well, maybe I'm wrong here. These are people that know what they're talking about. Maybe I should listen to them. Instead, what Hoover would do is, at best, blacklist these clergy, and at worst, deem them as communist. And one of the most famous antagonistic relationships that Hoover had with a prominent clergy person in the United States was his attempt to blackmail the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. There were many at this time who turned to Hoover for guidance because they agreed with him. They thought that he and his position as somebody prominent in our government, meant that he had something, had some wisdom that was needed to really understand what was going on in our faith. They and Hoover, who agreed with their assessment, were both wrong. But this idea of turning to the government, turning to those with political power to find some wisdom, to find some truth about faith and religion, this isn't something that's new. This is something that we see in our gospel today. Our gospel today talking about the Epiphany, the manifestation of Jesus in this world through the star that the Magi followed. Now, these Magi, these wise men, were people from far beyond the nation of Israel. And they were learned men too. So they saw this star, and they knew from their studies, knew from their wisdom, that the star was leading them to someone important, someone they understood to be the king of the Jews. And so they went to the logical place to find a king. They went to the palace. They went to King Herod to figure out where it was they needed to go. In a sense, really who it was that they were searching for. But the thing is that Herod didn't know what this star was all about. Didn't know where the star was pointing. But he did have the ear of those who did. He was able to help them determine that they were looking for the Messiah and where they might begin that search. But Herod doesn't like this idea that there's somebody more powerful than him out there. He doesn't like this threat to his authority. So he plans to use the Magi to find out where the Messiah is, so that he doesn't have to worry about this threat to his power. So he can find the Messiah out and kill him. Now, fortunately, the wise men were open. They were open to seeing that God might be working in a way that they couldn't yet understand, that God might be working in a way that they wouldn't have anticipated. So they go. They find this child. They don't find him in the palace like they originally expected. As we know from our Christmas celebration, Jesus was born in poverty. And yet, these wise men still go and worship this little child. They still give their precious gifts, their treasures, to this small, insignificant child born into poverty, because they know that this is the child, that the star, that God has been leading them towards. And thankfully, the Magi continue to listen to God. They listen to the message of the angel, telling them to go back home by a different way. That way, the Messiah could be protected. That way, Herod's plan of killing this child wouldn't succeed. God's power isn't found in strength and might, like the Hoovers and the Herods of this world would have us believe. No, the power of God is found in a village, The power of God, as Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians 12:9, is made perfect in weakness. Perfect in the weakness of God coming down into this world, being one of us as a human being. And not just being one of us in riches and in splendor. Being one of us in the depths of poverty, in the backwaters of the Roman Empire. A time where being poor, living in poverty, was a very, very difficult thing. True power isn't found in strength. It's not found in winning. It's not found in the depths of political power or in the palace. It's found in the weakness that God chose to live into in this world. That's where God is. That's where we're called to go to. The wise men, the Magi, were open to listening to what God had to say, to seeing that the true power wasn't with the Herods or the Hoovers of this world, but was with this tiny, small, weak, and insignificant baby. If we're to be like them, we need to be open to what God is showing us too. We have to realize that God's power isn't the kind of power we're expecting. We have to follow where God is. It means going where we might not expect. Not winning, not bearing strength, but bearing the love that God had for us and showed us by coming into this world and being born as our Lord Jesus Christ.